Hello, Los Angeles. Hello, California. Hello, America. And hello, world. Thank you for tuning in. This is Politics with Roger. I'm Roger. This is where we like to discuss politics. This is our weekly news summary show where we try to review and discuss the different mainstream, different narratives coming from corporate media and from independent media, and just try to help everybody sort out all the massive amounts of information that we are bombarded with here in the modern era and try to make some sense of it. Today is December 22nd, 2017. It is about 1:30 p.m. in Los Angeles. Um, about this week, I was really hoping, with Christmas coming up, just for a nice, simple, easy broadcast with, light content, but that is not what we're going to get. We are seeing an acceleration of events basically happening, and what's happening is what we've been anticipating for basically the entire year. We've seen a struggle between the previous government, what we refer to as the establishment, prior to the Trump administration taking power in the United States by winning an election, and this establishment or deep state or globalists or whatever you want to call them, they've been holding on to power and trying to undermine our legitimately elected president since he has taken power last year. And we're getting to the point now where the former government, the deep state government, is just hanging on by their fingernails, and they are getting quite desperate, which makes the situation that we're in today very, very dangerous. But on the positive side, we're seeing a lot of victories because if you're like me and you support the Make America Great Again movement, if you support liberty and the libertarian movement, if you support putting America first, if you support nationalism, not just in America but around the world, we are having victories. But again, the situation is getting very volatile as we see operators in the former government really getting desperate. Before I dive into the news, I just want to take a step back. I know we're getting a lot of new viewers and a lot of new people to the broadcast, and I want to just explain real quickly, who is the deep state, who are the globalists, and if I know most of you, a lot of you who've been watching this program already know, so bear with us just for a minute. Well, the deep state, the globalists, are basically operatives in our government who are typically unelected. Specifically the CIA, the Department of Justice, and the FBI, and in recent years, the Democrat National Committee. Now, that's not to say that there weren't Republican officials involved. I can point to Republicans like the Bush family, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Mitt Romney, also as operators in what we would call the deep state. These are unelected, and there's also included in the globalist cabal is unelected global consortiums or conglomerates, institutions such as the UN, the United Nations, the EU, and NATO. We also saw these bodies try to put together trade unions, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, which was immediately repealed the moment Donald Trump took office. And we'll get to some of that in a second, and then these institutions are backed by the media industrial complex, what we call the mainstream media. Basically, most of the television you watch, and also on the internet, YouTube, Google, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook. These are the media arms, or the mouthpieces of the globalists, or what we call the deep state. We mentioned last week how Amazon has been doing business with the CIA for years now and getting billions of dollars in funding to basically help the CIA run operations, and also Amazon, for their part, makes a lot of money, and Jeff Bezos. How many people knew? I know a lot of you do know this, but most television and radio media is owned by 6 companies. Those companies being General Electric, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. So, it's called, the tactic is called controlled opposition. While you think you have choices in the very important industry of media, what you really are oftentimes consuming is scripted media made to look like they opposing each other, or to have some variations, but for the most part they are all advancing the same narratives. If you ever watch pro wrestling, you might have an idea of what I'm talking about. Everything is scripted. The outcome is already planned, and that is basically where our media sits today. So this is why you've seen the rise of independent media. Operators like myself, there's literally thousands of people like me out there distributing information, and social media and what we call the blogosphere, advancing different narratives that we are basing on the truth through our analysis, and it's often contradictory to the narratives that we get from the mainstream media. But these are the players. This is the deep state. This is globalism and the globalists. Certain countries that were involved in the infiltration of America are who you would expect, and some of this is normal behavior between governments. Russia, China, Saudi Arabia had all gained enormous influence into our country in the last 20 years, going back maybe even further than that. And like I said, a lot of that's normal. It's normal for governments to try to infiltrate one another. The problem here in America is we've had our own politicians selling us out and selling our country piece by piece to these operatives. And this is what we called globalism. And this is why in the campaign of 2016 with Donald Trump, the concept of sovereignty and national sovereignty became a huge issue, and still is to this day a huge issue. So what is the objective of the deep state and globalism? Very simply, power, to consolidate power and to take control of everything. And a lot of people, normal people don't understand. And this includes me too, because, most people don't lust for that kind of power. But at these levels, these global elites, leaders of countries, very wealthy industrialists from all over the world, many of them do crave power, and consolidating power is their objective. What are their tactics? Well, the tactics most often is destabilization, basically creating order out of chaos, basically creating so much chaos that they would have to come in after the fact to restore order to the country or to the world or wherever the chaos was created. Never mind the fact that they are oftentimes the perpetrators of the chaos that precedes the order. But that is a tactic, and you see this, in immigration. We see this, refugee crisis, open borders, creates chaos, and we'll get to that a little later. There's a few stories we'll share about it. Europe. You see it in divide and conquer, where institutions out there try to divide countries by race, by gender, by economic status, and you see this all the time in promoted in our mainstream media. All these divide and conquer type tactics, and this is why it's important to recognize who these players are. This is why I'm going through this before I even get to the news, that you understand that there's this orchestrated attempt to destabilize the nation state through controlled media. Very, very important. There's also social engineering. What do I mean by social engineering? I mean movements like the transgenderism movement. There's food manipulation, forced vaccinations. And then there's popular culture and a lot of social engineering that is done through public schooling. Now, this is all important because it is orchestrated again, and a lot of it is to destabilize and debase tradition in the nation state. And remember that tradition is built on generations of experience, which is why it became tradition. And if they, globalists or outside actors, can debase a nation from its traditions, then they can replace it with anything that they want. Again, following that order out of chaos template. And then finally, how do these globalists finance themselves? Well, they steal our taxes. That's one way to do it. But there's also a lot of black market activity, drug sales, arms sales, and unfortunately, sex trafficking, sex slavery, child trafficking, and pedophilia has been also a very effective tactic for them to use to grow, to blackmail, and to finance themselves. So, in a nutshell, that's who we're dealing with. That is the deep state. That is globalist and globalism. And the stories that we've been talking about since I've started my broadcast around, I think, September we started. This is what we've been dealing with. This is what we've been fighting. Now, as we come to the end of the year, we've seen our nationalist movement in America expose a lot of what has been happening. And this is why we're getting to a point now where the deep state is ready to become defeated, at least politically, and hopefully it'll never lead to any kind of physical confrontation. But, we're not so sure about that because, there's because of all this, well, because of the stories that I'm about to read to you now. I mean, I was asking myself at the beginning of the week, is America a banana republic? And a lot of the news from the beginning of the week was really freaking me out because it just seemed like the deep state and globalists, we're still winning. We're still in control. But there's also some good news to share too. So we'll get to that now. We'll get right into the news of the day now. So I want to start off just with the Russian collusion conspiracy that has been advanced by our mainstream media for the last 15, 16 months at this point, even before the election. CNN, MSNBC have been two of the biggest outlets out there promoting the idea that Donald Trump had somehow colluded with the Russian government to steal the election in the United States. Most everybody knows at this point that this is a bogus story. It's been a bogus story. It's an orchestrated story. It's fake news. It's weaponized media. Weaponized media was the theme of last week's program because we have crossed a line where fake news has now become weaponized media. And we understand that this Russian collusion conspiracy is just that, a conspiracy and weaponized media in an attempt to undermine our elected president. The reason I bring it up, well, just a few things too. I'll point out names like Andrew McCabe, Rod Rosenstein. We've talked in previous weeks about this fake dossier that's been exposed, Peter Strzokka. All these things are falling apart. There's plenty of evidence now to suggest or to really prove that this story, this narrative is absolutely false. So now you see the deep state and their operatives in the media pivoting. We saw a story in the week about how basically the mainstream media threatening violence if Robert Mueller is removed. And just to read a couple of headlines, Trump, I'm not considering firing special counsel Mueller. From Fox News, Trump transition lawyer Mueller improperly obtained documents in Russia probe. This is from, let's see here, Axios. Scoop, Mueller obtains tens of thousands of Trump transition emails. That is illegal, of course. Trump denies rumor on the Hill of plan to fire Mueller. Even Eric Holder, the former attorney general, weighed in, calls for protests if Trump fires Robert Mueller. Now, I can tell you Robert Mueller is not going to be fired because Robert Mueller is digging his own political grave. And it's not because they're being bullied out of it by these threats, but quite frankly, this investigation isn't hurting the president politically anymore. But it's interesting because you are seeing, again, fake news becoming weaponized media. Now, Antifa domestically has been used as as basically the physical arm, the boots on the ground domestically, and we saw Black Lives Matter kind of come and go, and they're still probably out there somewhere. But the Democrats and their allies in the mainstream media have implemented basically Nazi-type tactics, brown shirt tactics, Bolshevik tactics, Jacobin tactics, and basically have been advancing violence. I mean, we've seen Trump supporters for the entire year now, beaten up, spit on, ridiculed, basically demonized. You saw the punch a Nazi in the face fad. I mean, you've seen all sorts of evidence. You see on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, calls to kill Trump supporters, calls to kill the president himself. And we documented all this in previous weeks, so I'm not going to re-show all those articles. But these are, I mean, it's you can recognize these as very specific communist tactics. These are communist tactics, and now violence in the street would be the next step. And Antifa is out there, and to what extent is this? Where is this all going to go? We don't know, but it's very serious, and it's something that we need to watch out for. Here's another headline: Alt-left plans nationwide rapid response if Mueller fired from Russian probe. That was from Shepard Ambellis and IntelliHub, who's had a lot of great information. MoveOn.org says it would be a constitutional crisis if Trump were to fire FBI special counsel. Now, I just mentioned to you that Trump will not fire Robert Mueller, so why do they keep promoting this? They're promoting it to fire up their base, to fire up their quote-unquote ground troops, to cause trouble. Now, earlier in the week, and just a few other points about weaponized media. You saw BuzzFeed, a popular pop culture type political outlet, their editor put out in tweets, "All I want for Christmas is full communism now." So pretty interesting. I mean, this is how propaganda works. So, if you like communism, fine, advance an argument, elect communists into our government and Congress at the local level, and then, let's do it at the ballot box. But that's not how communism usually works. Communists usually come into power by creating chaos, throwing a society into utter chaos through riots or violence, and then again order out of chaos, implementing their government after the fact. Also, the New York Times saw an article earlier this week that I just wanted to share. Let me just scroll to it. The real coup plot is Trump's. This was an opinion out of the New York Times on December 20th of this year, and that's just fantastical. Again, it's straight propaganda, but I want to point out to it what coup. Donald Trump was legitimately elected in 2016 by the citizens of the United States. He's in control of our government. He is the president. He is the chief executive, legitimately elected. To suggest that he's implementing a coup would be to suggest that he's overthrowing himself, which is ridiculous, or overthrowing our Constitution, which he is not. So anyway, you see this weaponized media ratcheting up. And then we saw Monday of this week a train crash in Olympia, Washington. Killed a few people. Many were injured. Let's see if I can just find that headline. Might not be able to find it fast for you. That's okay. I'll still post it up. Now, the reason I bring this up also is because there was a lot of chatter in April of this year in the same location, Olympia, Washington. Antifa was posting on their media and their social media about how they would sabotage train tracks to stop fracking, basically, in Washington State, and to commit these acts of terror, and they were threatening it, and this was very real. Now, I have not yet verified that the cause of this train wreck in Olympia, Washington this week was a direct result of these tactics of these people in Antifa, but I have my strong suspicions, so I would tell everyone to keep an eye on that story. Don't let that go away, and we'll see what happens in the upcoming weeks. But this could be the result of weaponized media, where people are beginning to act and beginning to commit more acts of terror, encouraged by their mainstream media propagandists of choice. So you see an escalation here, and you see an acceleration towards the end of the year. So hopefully we will not be seeing more of this, but we must be very, very wary. So anyway, moving on, I want to talk a little bit about destabilization programs, not just in the United States, but also around the world, and a little bit about the United Nations, because the United Nations was in the news this week. With this whole destabilization program that has been implemented by the UN, we basically see a situation where non-citizens are granted more rights than actual citizens of the country, of the host country. We saw this in America in recent weeks with the murder of Kate Steinle by a non-citizen, and the non-citizen was let free, let just allowed to walk free, which was an outrage here in the United States for obvious reasons. But people are starting to figure out that non-citizens have more rights than actual citizens, and it's not just in this country. I mean, it's bad enough here in the United States. Europe is now experiencing an epidemic. Countries like Sweden, London, France, Germany are all seeing a huge uptick in violence, a huge uptick in rape, and not much. And they're also seeing a huge uptick in censorship because, again, the media outlets of globalism are consolidated. So particularly YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Google, Amazon, you see a redaction of a lot of these stories. I just wanted to point to a couple stories that we saw this week. One was in Sweden, who are experiencing a horrible rape epidemic. Sweden, migrants bash in skull, brutally raped Swedes won't be deported. Headline, Jihad Watch, Sweden, Muslim migrants gang rape women broadcasted live on Facebook. Town Hall, journalists investigating rape epidemic in Sweden, beaten by migrants speaking Arabic. Let's see here. This is from Zero Hedge. Swedish police cannot cope with cannot cope with huge numbers of rapes since migrants arrived. That's from Zero Hedge. Infowars reporting. Sweden, migrants charged with ruthless gang rape of woman walk free. Court says sex with up to 20 men was voluntary despite victims' injuries. This was reported by Paul Joseph Watson on December 19th. So there you go. Non-citizens having more rights than citizens. You see kind of a pivot happening in France as the new president, Macron, is now being inundated, and he sees his country kind of falling apart. Again, another headline from Zero Hedge, French mayors panic as migrants overwhelm cities, beg Macron for help. So you see things coming to a head in France as basically they've allowed in too many refugees, and they're starting to lose control. Now, thank God we in the United States are not at that level yet. But we have to recognize what's happening happening around the world, and then make sure that this doesn't happen in our country. And before you say, "Well, it's not happening in our country; it's not a threat," we just had this Kate Steinle event. So to dismiss this would be a very, very foolish thing. London, just again to about UN. Just basically the UN destabilization program in London, Britain First, a group that is a nationalist movement in the United Kingdom, is constantly censored, is constantly blocked off of YouTube. That's been a big problem. And then also you see Brexit, the legitimate election to pull out of the EU, it has been threatened in recent weeks by, again, the bureaucrat government of the United Kingdom, which is trying to override the vote from its people. So very concerning there. And then earlier from this week, from Chicago, some headlines here from the Chicago Tribune. Bring in the UN to solve Chicago genocide, Boykin says. Boykin is a commissioner of Chicago, county commissioner. Headline, County Commissioner will ask the United Nations to help solve Chicago's gun violence. CBS Chicago, Commissioner suggests UN send troops to fight quiet genocide of gun violence in Chicago. And I just want to point out, this piggybacks an initiative that was passed by Loretta Lynch in the Obama Department of Justice called the Strong Cities Initiative, where this initiative literally tried to nationalize our police force with a foreign police force, and this was written into law. This is illegal, it's unconstitutional, but nobody could stop it when it was written because we had no control of our government at that time. We're just starting to get control of our government, but you see what Chicago is trying to pull, or these operators in Chicago are trying to pull, which is they're basically trying to globalize our country, and they're starting with Chicago. and they're trying to use gun violence as an excuse to use foreign troops to deny Americans their Second Amendment right. Very, very scary story. So it's something that I hope all you people now understand and speak out against, because having UN troops in our cities is absolutely against our Constitution, and it's the precursor to very, very bad things happening in this country. So we have to fight this and sound the alarms. I want to pivot for a second now just to global politics. Earlier this week, Yemen fired a missile into Saudi Arabia, which might seem like by itself a fairly mundane story, and you probably wonder why I would even bring it up. Well, the first reason is I want to talk about basically what's happening now is there's a nexus between four countries: Yemen, Iran, North Korea, and China. I won't go as far as to call it the axis of evil, as George W. Bush famously called North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. But right now, these are the countries that are being used by the globalists to advance globalism. Now, I'll say about China that China has kind of been playing both sides of the fence since Donald Trump has taken over as president. And, they're still kind of, again, well, just playing both sides. You kind of don't know which way they're going to go. These countries are the ones that are creating problems worldwide. Now, I'm a little bit disappointed, or not, I'm concerned to report that the chatter is that the United States will strike North Korea. I had reported in previous weeks that I didn't anticipate a strike happening because North Korea does not want war, and Kim Jong-un does not want to basically commit suicide. The North Koreans know that they cannot defeat the United States in a war, but the North Koreans have nuclear weapons, they have heavy artillery, they can create a lot of chaos on the way out. The choice to go into war with North Korea doesn't have anything to do with Kim Jong-un's actions at this point. It has more to do with geopolitical balances and how that North Korea has been used as a proxy by China for generations now, for a couple generations. And it seems that the decision has been made to go into North Korea for a strike. So this will probably be done after the Olympics, but maybe before. But keep a close eye on this, because this is the chatter that I've been picking up out of Washington, D.C., and from some of my favorite pundits and intelligence sources. And this chatter seems to grow. So it's very, very scary. But, we'll see how this all shakes out. So, for 30 minutes I've been hammering you with bad news and a lot of concerning headlines. But, there's also been a lot of good news this week. And also our Liberty Movement, our Make America Great Again movement, our America First movement is gaining and gaining all the time in power, political power. And the reason that we're seeing all these scary stories popping up and you see the deep state making all these maneuvers is precisely because we have had so much success. The Donald Trump administration has had so much success delivering our government back to the people. And I'll tell you, earlier in the week, I felt terrible after reading a lot of stories and kind of absorbing a lot of the news that I just shared with you. I was feeling pretty bad. But by Wednesday, tax cuts had passed in both the House and the Senate and was signed by the president, I think just either yesterday or today. And this was such a monumental event for a whole number of reasons. But, we can... It's just a tremendous event. And I'll tell you why right now. Not only is it going to be an incredible stimulant to our American economy, not only is it going to bring a lot of jobs back, not only does it undermine China's economy, and I say that because, our corporate taxes were right around, I think it was 35%, while China, think about this, communist China had corporate rates around 15 to 20%, while supposedly free laissez-faire capitalist America had corporate rates for 35%. So right off the bat, we're going to see a lot of corporations, global corporations, coming back to America, doing business in America. The middle class is gonna benefit tremendously from. It's just going to be a huge wealth generator for our country, and that's just the economic ramifications of this bill. Hugely important, wildly important. We've already had growth over 3% this year, and the projections that our government's talking about now, 4%, 5, 6%. I mean, these are just crazy boomtown numbers. I mean, I know they're just projections at this point, but the mere fact that they're predicting them is very, very exciting, quite frankly. We didn't get over 2% growth in 8 years with Barack Obama. I mean, they did that on purpose, but basically, we're breaking the shackles of all the regulation, of all the tools that were used to suppress the American economy. We are throwing those off, and this is, if that were the only indicator, if that were the only benefits that we got from this tax cut, that would be good enough. But there's more. This tax bill is a major, major blow to global boondoggle operations, because so much of our tax money we're going to basically whether countries or institutions that don't even like us. Basically, all of our tax money from our country was being stolen, and this tax bill is going to cut off a lot of those financial money streams to actors that are not friends of America. The UN, the EU, for example, NATO. If they oppose our country, if they oppose our policies, why are we giving them money? Great question. So this is very tremendous, but it also cuts off the main source of financing for many of these global operations that I have previously mentioned that are hurting our country. It's cutting off their supply line. So huge, huge victory. And the other thing that I wanted to point out about this was, for the first time since Donald Trump has taken over as president, it's a huge indicator that he is getting control of our government. Like I'd said at the beginning of this broadcast, our government has been, the former government, the Obama holdovers, have basically, in our bureaucracies, and a lot of the Republican holdovers that have not been voted out yet, but we'll get you guys in 2018. Don't worry about that. They have been opposing our new president since day one, since he got into office. The fact that he was able to pass this bill, this tax cut bill, and it's the biggest tax cut in the history of our country, by the way, is a huge indicator that the ship is turning and that we're gaining control. And again, that is why this is great news. This is tremendous news, but that is also why we are starting to see an uptick in the activity from the deep state, from the globalists, and that we are in a very dangerous time right now because the deep state globalists are getting desperate because they are being ravaged on just every level. The financial, the economic level being a very, very significant one for them. So moving forward on a couple more stories, and this will be a shocker for many of you. Political reporting this week. Let me just find the headlines. I think this is just better to read these. Out of Politico, excuse me. Obviously not part of the vast right-wing conspiracy, not part of independent media, very much considered mainstream media, very much considered leftist. Politico, the secret backstory of how Obama let Hezbollah off the hook. An ambitious U.S. task force targeting Hezbollah's billion-dollar criminal enterprise ran headlong into the White House's desire for a nuclear deal with Iran. This was broken by Josh Meyer this week, putting the focus square on President Barack Obama. A few more headlines. Political reporter says Obama administration derailed Hezbollah investigation. Let's see here. This is out of hot air. Politico. Obama let Hezbollah run cocaine into the U.S. for Iran deal and more. Again, just tremendous bombshell after bombshell. Out of the Daily Wire, shock, Obama helped Hezbollah to secure bogus Iran deal. Here are the key takeaways from Politico's report. And let's see here. Reporter stands by bombshell story of Obama letting Hezbollah off the hook. Tremendous, tremendous news. This is going to spill over. Oh, here we go. One last headline. This was important. This is out of Israel. Haaretz. Obama administration reportedly shielded Hezbollah from DEA and CIA to save Iran nuclear deal. Covert operation named Project Cassandra was aimed to halt Hezbollah's massive drug and weapons trafficking network, but according to a political report, the White House got in the way. This was reported December 18th of this week. So, with the focus now coming on the former President Obama's illicit activities, I think we're also going to have a kind of a revival of Fast and Furious about some of the arms dealings that was going on into Libya to topple Libya, and also how we were funding ISIS. And again, I mean, when you talk about acceleration, this is a major acceleration of events, and I mean, it couldn't be more bombshell than that. So we'll just see how this all plays out. Finally, I just want to talk about the last story here, again, about child sex trafficking, sex slavery. Unfortunately, America has become the top consumer of pedophilia around the world. I don't know exactly when this happened, but since the Trump administration has taken over, the mainstream media has been suppressing stories about arrests happening all around the country. And anyway, I'm pleased to say that we're getting on top of this problem, but it's sad to know that it's happening also. I wanted to profile just a second a guy named Craig Sawman Sawyer, who has been out in front of this with activities. I think they have some kind of, I don't know if it's a movie or an expose coming out about what they have discovered. It's truly, truly very sad. But it begs the question, if everybody knew all this stuff was going on before the Trump administration, why weren't arrests being made until Trump had taken over the presidency? So I'll just tell you. I mean, you can ponder that yourself. But the reason is because it was a major financing. It was used to finance these black operatives, globalism, deep state operations, and is also used as blackmail for many of our politicians. And I'm just scratching the surface of this story. It could be years before we find out everything that has been going on. I mean, we'll probably never find out everything, but keep your eye on these stories because I mean, so much is going to come out. We talked about this a little bit. I mean, I remember we were blowing up social media before the election about a lot of these kind of stories. I mean, it gets even more bizarre with spirit cooking and Luciferianism. I'm not even going to touch that today. I mean, I probably dumped enough on you guys. But the child sex trafficking, sex slavery that is taking place in our country, in the United States, thankfully is under siege. And the reason I bring this story, is because I wanted to talk about briefly this headline. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Out of the New York Post, Eric Schmidt's surprise Alphabet announcement rekindles womanizing rumors. That's not a great headline. What's happening is Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, is stepping down. And there's a lot of speculation, particularly from Jerome Corsi, who's been an outstanding source of information, that Eric Schmidt is seriously compromised, and this has everything to do with sex trafficking. I am not reporting this as news. This is analysis and conjecture at this point, but keep your eye on this story. You'll recall there were stories before the election of 2016. Google's been long accused of manipulating searches, burying conservative news, protecting Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election season. So him stepping down as CEO at Google, this seemed to come out of nowhere. It was a surprise to a lot of people. And, my speculation is that he's quite compromised. And I think that sex trafficking, or it has been implied that sex trafficking is a part of all this as well. So that's a mouthful. That's the news for today, guys. we're going to see an acceleration. There'll probably be quite a bit of news from today till next week. Also, I was hoping that things would be quiet, but the holidays is when a lot of deep state or a lot of crazy things in politics happens during the holiday season because they know most people are not paying attention. So we'll try to be paying attention over the Christmas season about what's going on. So we expect to have a lot of news next Friday too, because you do see this acceleration. The deep state is desperate. But anyway, hey guys, we'll try not to think about that for the next couple days. I want to wish everybody a very, very Merry Christmas, and we'll see you guys next week. All right, take care. Thanks for tuning in.